Recording. Okay. Hi there, Shavon Lindley here, CEO of Women Evolution and creator of the Forbes interview series, Rising Leaders. Today I'm here with Ambassador Laura Holgate. And so if you haven't had a chance to read her article live on Forbes, click the link below right now so you can check it out and let us know what you think. Because what you're getting ready to hear is going to be the actual footage from the interview and her story directly. And you're going to have an opportunity to ask her questions live after this article hits Forbes. So if you have any questions or anything else comes up that you want to know, especially about Ambassador Holgate, make sure and put them in the comment section and we'll ask her live during the Q&A. Laura Holgate is the former ambassador to the International Atomic Energy Agency and other United Nations offices of Vienna. So thank you so much for sharing your story with me and so many others today. So first off, I really want to know, and maybe hopefully I'm not the only person, but can you help me wrap my brain around what it is that you did as ambassador? Like what does that role entail?
Well, as ambassador, you have kind of two main jobs. One is to reflect U.S. policies in a broader international context with other international leaders and other ambassadors to a multilateral organization. And then you also have the responsibility to run your team, to lead a mission, in my case about 45 people, to develop policy ideas, to appropriately reflect those into other policy discussions that are happening in the international organizations or in smaller groups of other ambassadors. And so it's kind of those twin roles that make up the job. But the mission there works on a whole range of issues, very broad issues. The International Atomic Energy Agency is best known as the quote-unquote UN nuclear watchdog. They're in charge of making sure that countries don't acquire nuclear weapons in contrast to their treaty commitments. But there's also the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, which deals with drugs and crime, corruption, those kinds of issues. There's the Office of Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty that monitors whether or not countries are testing nuclear weapons. And those are just a couple of the major organizations there. So it's a diverse portfolio.
And what drew you to this industry?
I've been working in trying to deal with the preventing nuclear, biological, chemical weapons and attacks for pretty much my whole career. And it really started when I had a chance as a kid to be an international traveler because my dad was an airline pilot. So that really helped me see that there was a world beyond suburban Kansas City and have a chance to explore that world. I knew I wanted to be part of that broader world. And so when I was at Princeton, I wanted to study arms control and, kind of the big US-Soviet dilemma of the nuclear weapons problems and risks. And so that coincided at that time with this movie that came out when I was a freshman. That's in 1983. Some people may remember The Day After, kind of a cheesy TV movie that really depicted what a nuclear exchange might look like. And the town that they picked to be the target of the Soviet missiles in that movie was Lawrence, Kansas, which was just a few miles from where I grew up in Kansas City. And so it really, and very literally quite hit home and really galvanized me, gave me a mental image of what I really wanted to try to stop, to prevent nuclear war, to prevent that kind of devastation, to preserve, global peace. And so I had a chance at Princeton to study international relations, to study arms control, even though I failed out of Russian language class and Soviet politics. It's probably a good thing because I didn't become a Sovietologist because the Soviet Union broke up only a few years after I graduated. So I would have become an historian instead of a policy wonk. But that's really what really lit the fuse of my interest in this issue.
I mean, if you needed any other like in your face reasons why you should continue to do this, and they create a movie just when what you were wanting to study. So how did you get your first job in this field?
So I was fresh out of grad school. I'd gotten a master's at MIT in defense and arms control studies, which was exactly what I wanted to do. And I was planning to move to Washington to, try to work in government or around government on these issues. But my husband still had a couple years in Boston to finish his degree. And so I was looking for jobs in the Boston area. And I was so thrilled to get a job offer from Randy Forsberg, who was the founder of the Nuclear Freeze Movement, a MacArthur Genius Grant recipient, and really a fellow MIT alumna, and just really an idol for someone like me in that field. And so I was thrilled when I had a chance to go work for her. But before I could even start that job, she called me up one night in the middle of a dinner party at my house and said, I actually ran out of money, so I can't hire you after all. And I was in tears, and I had guests at my dinner table, and I was like, I can't talk to you about this right now, but I'm going to call you tomorrow, and you are going to help me figure out what my next step should be. And I called her back, and she had some ideas, and one of them was to go talk to this Harvard professor named Ash Carter, who was just up the road, not someone I had really been aware of at that stage in my life. And so I went and put in my resume. All they had was a secretarial type job, and they were worried that with a master's degree, I was overqualified for that. I said, you know what, you're doing interesting things here in this center. I'm unemployed. I'll be the judge of overqualified. If you guys let me participate in the work that's going on here, in not just as an admin assistant, but join your conversations, join the workshops and so on, then I'll promise you 6 months. And they said, okay, that works for us. And I ended up being in on the ground floor of some really amazing groundbreaking work that Ash Carter and Bill Perry, both of whom went on to be secretaries of defense, and to work on these issues and really create the groundwork from which the rest of my career came from.
Wow, I love how you have been in control over, even though things were out of your control, right? They lose funding, but you said, look, I'm going to call you tomorrow and you're going to give me responsive. I mean, that confidence and that bravery, I mean, it's almost, you didn't have a choice, right? And you're like, I need somewhere else. But then to be able to go and again, have the courage to say that to Ash Carter around, let me be the judge if this is too much, but let me sit in, let me learn, and just really shaping your career, that quality, right? I love that about you. So did you see any challenges being a woman in the industry?
Well, it's obviously national defense is a male-dominated industry, but I was coming along kind of just at the time then in the early 90s that people were starting to realize that this male-dominated thing was not sustainable. It was not appropriate, and that they really needed to diversify the women in the field. And so I would say, as I moved from position to position, it was really more a benefit to me to be a woman than the contrary. And part of that was because I had a great opportunity to work with some really amazing men and women who were my bosses and who were the ones who were selecting people for positions. But I never felt that in the actual application or promotion process that I was disadvantaged by being a woman. But certainly in the doing of the day-to-day job, you stand out. And in my early days at the Pentagon, I was, young, female, civilian, and political appointee. So there were lots of reasons for the established Pentagon community, both civilian and military, to question me, to challenge my authority, my knowledge, and my presence sometimes. And it was never really clear which of those four attributes they were reacting to. But ultimately, I think I was able to work hard, show that I was contributing, that I had some of the answers to bring to the problem on the table, that I was effectively representing my bosses and their positions when I went into meetings. And so I think I was benefited by a meritocratic approach where hard work and insights were rewarded.
You've had this very interesting career where you've worked in mixed environments, military, civilian. What are some of the key differences in these workplace environments, and did you have strategies for how to stand out?
Well, I was pretty much always standing out, but just because of who I was. But it's a very interesting question. In a bureaucratic environment, it matters who fits where in the hierarchy. And for the military folks, they wear a uniform. And so everyone can tell at a glance, oh, that's the general, that's the colonel, that's the captain, and everybody knows where they fit in relationship to each other. For civilians, it's a little bit harder, and especially for young female civilians who are, in my case, I was playing a role that was traditionally occupied by people more senior. And so it was, you sometimes had to just be sure that you knew enough about who else was in the meeting, that you knew who your peers were, and that you could be sure that you were sitting yourself at the table instead of on the back bench, if that was where you were supposed to be. To recognize, to be able to look around the room and observe the behavior of the people that was what you were supposed to be modeling as well. And so, I was fortunate to have, kind of a cadre of women colleagues, all of us, more or less around the same age, who were very close and shared our insights and our strategies and our frustrations. And so, usually there'd be we'd very seldom be just one of us in a meeting. And so often, we'd walk out and kind of say, oh my gosh, can you believe that guy said that? Or, that was my idea and he totally took it. And so those were valuable moments of venting and recognizing that, that wasn't exactly the way that meeting was supposed to go.
So as your career has developed, what is some of the more challenging or maybe the hardest career lesson that you've had to overcome?
Oh, for me, it was really learning how to delegate. And that was both a self-care journey as well as an intellectual journey. Because I had in my time working at Harvard and then working in the Pentagon, I was running a program that I had been in on the ground floor of. I had conceived it, I'd watched it be shaped and developed, and I was arguably the one most knowledgeable about it, even of my staff of 11. And I had to be, or my staff of 7 at that time. And so I had to really be involved in almost every single thing they were doing. And in many cases, they knew details, but I was the one who could put the strategy together and link, connect the dots across the various stovepipes of what was being done. And so that was exhausting, because almost everything that came out of our office, either that went up into the bureaucracy for decision making or went out to international partners in Russia and Kazakhstan and Ukraine, I had to be involved in all of that. And so that was just a really, it got to be a burnout point of view for me, and then a burnout point. And then I moved to a new job where I suddenly had 40 people, and it was a very technical job. And I had engineers and scientists working for me, and they were deeply knowledgeable on things I was never, ever going to know. And so I really had to figure out how, and they knew their jobs better than I did when I first got there. And so it was a totally different situation. And I really had to learn how to trust them, how to learn from them the things I needed to learn to provide that managerial vision and oversight, but also how to let it go and just accept that they were going to do things that was their job to do, but that I was not qualified to do. But I was responsible that it would be done well, and that it would be presented effectively. And so moving from that, from the position of, near omniscience to a position of, just really kind of making sure that everybody else was doing what they were supposed to be doing. And then, finding out what's the strategic leadership, what's the vision that I can insert into their technical and, very detailed work.
how did you build that trust or the relationships with your team members at that time to know that you could trust them taking over these key elements, other than the fact that you didn't know how to do it in the beginning?
Well, some of them some of them I had worked with in my previous positions, and so it wasn't an entirely novel concept or set of topics. But when I got there, I found that the senior management kind of had a habit of sitting down and having lunch together most days of the week. I mean, there were times when people had lunch appointments or whatever, but at least 3 or 4 times a week, they were sitting down and having lunch. I said, well, it took me a little while to notice that. And then I realized I should be having lunch with them. We should be talking and creating, the informal bonds that really create a leadership team. And we would talk about cars, and we would talk about golf, and we'd talk about biking, but then we could also talk about dogs and things that I was interested in too. And it really gave us a way to develop a team, esprit de corps that, but also, the substance of, it would be interwoven with how are we going to approach this, congressional hearing next week, or we have to go brief the secretary next month. What are the things we need to get in a row to get that done? Or we've really got this tough personnel issue on the team, how are we going to collectively work to solve that? And so it was that mix of structure and informality that I think really helped us bond as a management team.
Now, tell me how your journey to becoming ambassador really took place. Like how was that moment for you? Like what, again, it's still hard for me to wrap my brain around what you do every day. So I'm trying to imagine, I see all of these steps that you've done, but what was that final step? What was that, and what was that transition like for you?
Well, it was really felt like kind of a double blessing, and the job that I had at the White House, I was working for Susan Rice and on the National Security Council, and having really a dream job of working with agencies from all over the U.S. government on how do we prevent the intersection of terrorists and chemical or biological or nuclear weapons. And but I'd been there for 6 years, and there had been an opening of this ambassador position in Vienna, and one of the ambassadors had left early, a previous ambassador, and I went to Susan Rice. I said, it's maybe a little bit greedy to want a second dream job, and I've loved working for you, Susan, but this would really, if I'm ever going to get to be an ambassador, this is the kind of position that it's going to be, because I am, as someone, with a fairly specialized set of knowledge, this position is one of the few that would be appropriate for someone like me. And I said, I really just would love to do this. And she's like, you would be fabulous. Absolutely. Let's make this work. And I didn't know exactly how she was going to take it. Because obviously then she'd have to replace me, and it would just, I didn't want her to feel like I was trying to escape her team, but she immediately saw what a great opportunity it was. And of course she had been an ambassador herself to the UN, and kind of an analogous position, and so she really understood what it took, and I think she saw that I had what it would take to make it work. And so she was really my champion, along with Dennis McDonough, who was President Obama's chief of staff, were really so influential, and a bunch of other people I will never know in getting the whole confirmation process over the hurdles that takes with Congress and everybody else.
So what were your first days like in this position? You finally get to this moment in your career. What was that like?
Well, it was really exciting. I mean, it was, I had a lot of experience in very specific chunks of my new responsibility, but a whole lot of things that were brand new. And so here's, where being able to kind of lean into a team to trust that they would guide you well served me in good stead, and where I had a super team on the ground, very knowledgeable. And the vast majority of what I was doing in my first few days was a mix of getting introductory briefings or update briefings from them and getting to know them as professionals, as foreign policy talented people. But also in a whole range, I think I did in my first 3 months, 70 courtesy calls with leaders of the international organizations, with other ambassadors. And that was great because it gave me a chance to, I always took someone from my staff with me. And so that gave me a chance, usually a junior person who was there to take notes, but who probably wrote the briefing material. And so it gave me a chance to bond with the junior people on my team who I wouldn't be seeing every day, to like read and kind of learn really quickly what it is that I wanted to get across to, you know, a counterpart ambassador or to the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency or whatever the points were. And then, you know, to kind of ride back in the car with them afterwards and dissect the meeting. You know, was that surprising to you? You know, we need to be sure we follow up on this, you know, and kind of both learn the issues as I did them, but also immediately providing feedback about, well, that briefing paper was a little bit confusing here once I got into the conversation, or, you know, this is really, really important. Make sure you follow up. And so it was a whole lot of that, which was great because it gave me a chance to not only meet my team and learn my team very quickly, but also to meet who my teammates would be among the other ambassadors, in some cases who my rivals would be, who some of the challenging partners would be among the other colleagues there.
Was the job what you expected it to be?
There weren't that many surprises because I had worked with that office, with that mission for several years, and I knew, you know, a lot about its ebb and flow. What I really had never done, though, was the kind of working with other ambassadors to affect the actual decision making of these organizations. I mean, I knew about intellectually, you know, that process, but, you know, there's a vote that's coming up at the next Board of Governors meeting, and we want to be sure it goes this way. And so these are the people we can always count on who always come along with us, but we need to convince these other people this time. And what are the arguments that they're going to listen to? And, you know, should I go ask for a meeting in their office? Should I invite them to lunch? Should we include them in a larger group at a dinner at my residence? I mean, all of these, you know, just the little, you know, the finger feel of what diplomacy on the front lines really looks like. And so that there's no amount of you know, storytelling or learning that you know, that's nothing I can see from the White House as I interacted with my predecessors there.
I mean, you've had such an experience of all of these different components, things that, I mean, people would always dream of, the Pentagon and the White House and being an ambassador. And so what else do you want people to know about your career journey, or what it was like to work in these different types of places?
Well, I really was very blessed with amazing leaders. At the Pentagon, I got to work with Ash Carter and Bill Perry, both, you know, true visionaries in the fields that I cared most about, but also in a lot of other things. And I got a chance to learn from them about broader topics than the things that I was really focused on. And the humanity and kindness that they brought was really refreshing. And then when I was at the White House, I mean, I was really there in many ways in kind of a golden age of female leadership. We had Susan Rice was the National Security Advisor. Lisa Monaco was the President's Homeland Security Advisor. Each of them had female deputies. At one point, I had 6 out of the 7 people on my staff were women. And it was, and many of my peers at the White House, some of my closest colleagues were women. And so it was just it wasn't even a question about what, you know, can a woman do this job, or, you know, it was just, and if any of the guys kind of said something that was a little bit off, you know, someone would call them on it. And there was this wonderful article that came out in the fall of 2016 that really shone a light on something that I was benefiting from without even knowing it, about how the senior women in the White House had decided that they needed to really support other women around the table. And so they developed this concept of amplification, where they would, you know, make a point of, if a woman in a meeting said something interesting or meaningful or put a good idea on the table, they say, yeah, Shavon had a really good idea there, and I think we ought to take that further, to make sure that, it was recognized that this was, this was coming from a woman who was there and being smart and being insightful, and wasn't then, appropriated by a male colleague, 5 minutes later in the meeting or whatever. And so it was, I didn't realize it at the time. And when I read the article, I'm like, wow, that is so cool that they were doing that. And that certainly, in a group setting, that was a very effective way to like keep the community together. And well, because we're working on really hard problems. I mean, it's not like, we're deciding, on how to run a party or something. I mean, we're trying to prevent chemical weapons attacks in Syria, and tempers are running high, and people have different ideas and have been frustrated by different things. And so just to know that as people are like really getting hot and heavy on the substance, that none of us have to kind of worry about, oh, am I being dissed because I'm a female in this meeting, or is my idea just not getting traction because it's not very good? And so it really just removes a whole layer of extraneous anxiety or interference when you've got like really hard things to work on, and that you have to work on them together.
Do you believe some of the women that you worked with, maybe, externally, people who didn't work with them maybe got a bad rap or were thought of as more challenging than really what you experienced?
Well, certainly, I think both Susan Rice and Lisa Monaco are known for being tough women and tough managers, and certainly tough adversaries. I confess I was a little bit scared of Susan when she first came to be the National Security Advisor. Once I got to know her, I realized what a human side there is to her. And I certainly benefited from her kind of mama bear attitude. Once you're on her team, man, she has your back. And she wants to promote you and highlight you, and along the path of getting the job done for the president. And so that was a really great opportunity that I had to work with them.
I want to thank you for sharing your valuable story with us and just giving everyone a sneak peek of what a life would be like in the spaces that you've had an opportunity to impact over your career. And I know you've got a lot more coming, even though you've already had so much experience. You all have been hearing from Ambassador Laura Holgate. And if you have any questions for Ambassador Holgate that you would like to know more of, post them in the comments below, because we're going to have an opportunity, you will have an opportunity to ask her your questions directly through a Facebook Live Q&A session. And so questions won't come from me, they'll be curated by what you've got for us. So check out the article, read it. If anything comes up, you're like, well, how do I do this? Or how would this be different? Or something, anything more you want to know, this is your chance. And if you have any other women that you believe should be recognized or whose stories should be told, there is an application button on the Shavon Lindley Facebook page where you can go and nominate that person, or even if it's yourself. So thanks again so much. And you're here on the Rising Leaders series here on Forbes. Thanks so much.